Do you know about your power users? So what are power users? Power users are users of your application or even like your online store who are very loyal, who get what your product is doing, who come back a lot of times, repeatedly use your product, and we can hope they get a lot of value from it. So they're a really good indicator to give you one or two levels more than, for example, when you just look into monthly active users, which is a very generic metric. If you look at power users and power usage patterns, you can dive a lot deeper how well your product is doing to transfer people starting out to use your product into power users. How you can work with this within product analytics tools, I show you in this video. But let's start with some theory about the power users. Let's have a look into how we can measure power users in product analytics. First of all, what is a power user? First, I still think it's not really a nice term, but it's used quite often, so I will stick with that. It's a user that gets value from your product constantly. And so let's unpack this a little bit. Get value. What does it mean? It means you have to have an understanding what kind of specific value your product can deliver. And this can be complicated because you can have different kind of value tracks. So depending on what your product is, so for example, you have something like Jira, then for a project manager, the value is totally different than one for a manager. Project manager wants to manage the project. They want to see where bottlenecks are appearing. They want to see what has been done. They want to do forecasts about the next months, and they want to give estimates if the project is still on track or not. The manager, for example, they are usually just interested in the last part. So they want to see if projects are still on track. So they don't really care about the details. So they get totally different kind of values from the product. And value definition is a category by its own. You can also have a value journey. So you have a first value that you unlock where you understand, oh yeah, look, this product is really good, it's giving me some benefit. Then you have different kind of ongoing values that your product hopefully delivers over time, and maybe people then upskill, so unlock new values, or the whole business is upscaling because like more and more people are using this, so different kind of scenarios appearing. So value is not easy, but you have to have an idea about value. And we will cover one example today where you can get an idea how you can get started with value. I think the most important thing is like to get started, to define some value which you think is a value, and then get some data, look into this. Another way is like to interview users, very successful users, to get an idea what kind of value they get out of the product. So value is the first one. And then the second one is from your product constantly. Constantly is important. So we have value and we have constantly. And constantly already gives you an idea where we want to go today. Constantly means, yes, we can get people to a first value experience, but since most of the products today are built on a subscription base, you need to deliver value over a long period of time. Hopefully really long, because the longer that is, the bigger your customer lifetime value is. And this constantly makes it hard to measure and makes it hard how you can look at it. So constantly is an important thing. We definitely have to put this into our perspective when we analyze it. Often I see a lot of setups that are good in identifying the first value pass, often like in a funnel and so on, but totally lose track about if they're continuously delivering that. And this, of course, like causing potential churn problems, churn risk, and everything else. So this defines a power user. And as you can already see, it's a definition. So you have to define the value. You have to define constantly what it means, which kind of time periods we are talking about. How often do they have to come back to get the value? So there are products people use 2 times a year and it's super cool and it works fine. But this is something you have to know. And you might have, at least I put it down, you might have multiple power users, which means not that multiple people are power users, but you have multiple roles or multiple versions of power users within your product. And so you have to identify them, you have to quantify them, you have to see how important they are for the different kind of business. And then of course, like you have to measure them, you have to check them. But how do you get started? First of all, of course, like you need to get an idea let's say, how an ideal user journey looks like, or you could also like ideal customer journey. In the end, these are actually two different perspectives. Ideal user journey means like you really go down to the individual and how they work with your product and how they consume the product. Ideal customer journey, especially like if you're in software as a service, these things are not, they are coupled, but they're not the same. So customer journey is more like the account, how it develops over time. So for example, if you're someone like Miro, you might have one person in your team starting out to use Miro, so they have their own user journey. But then at some point they might start to set up a team account, and then they invite one or two more people, and then more and more. And this basically introduces a customer journey. And this can also be interesting. So in the end, like not power users, but power accounts to look into something like this. This is where you get started, or this is where I get started. I usually sketch out, okay, if everything goes right, how would an ideal scenario look like from a user starting out with your product, platform, shop, whatever, to a first value experience, the first step where they already can see, okay, this is definitely giving me something, how they get it repeatedly, what kind of different scenarios it can develop, and then what needs to happen over a time period of a year that you can think, okay, it's still successful, and then maybe even go beyond and say, okay, what needs to happen in 2-3 years? The major thing that I want to do today, how you actually can measure it. So let's go over to the tools. And we will do this in Mixpanel, and we will do this in Amplitude, and we will start out in Mixpanel. And so I do it in this way. So in Mixpanel, I already prepared everything because I'm using this in production. So this is basically the setup that I use for Deep Sky data to identify power users on our end. And in Amplitude, I don't have this data set, so I'm using a generated data set. We are already here, but where we have to go, where you have to get started is when you want to analyze power users, you need to work with cohorts, because cohorts group people based on behavior and criteria into specific kind of buckets. And they stay in this bucket based on the definition, and we will see in a second. So for example, time plays an important part, how long people stay in a specific kind of bucket. And for identifying power users, this is super important because no one gets a power user and stays like this forever. They can lose this, or you lose them in the end. So we have to bake this in. Just as a quick reminder, if you're looking for the cohorts, so you go here to data management, then you find the cohorts here, then you can come to this kind of screen. And as you can see here, I created different kind of cohorts to map out a power user journey. To give you an idea how this looks like is, so we start out, let's say, with a new user, easily to identify. Then of course we have returning users. We have both, which are important for us and also important for us to understand. They both can become power users over time. Power user, and then of course something can happen to this power user that, for example, ideally they stay power users over time, but unfortunately often it doesn't really think so. We introduce something which we call power user at risk. That means this was someone who showed power user behavior before, but it's not showing it now for, let's say, a specific kind of time period. And at some point, the power user can have churned. So then we basically lost them. So they might, at some point, come back and become power users again. So it's not out of question. And the interesting thing is, like, when we build something like this, is already an invitation to the growth and marketing team, also to the product team, to figure out, to prevent this, to activate this. You cannot totally prevent this. There are always people who will churn out. But maybe you can introduce methods to bring them back to be a power user. And then, of course, you can work on this. So in the end, the errors here define how you work based on the data to improve your power user experience. Okay, so enough talking, but let me show how we do this. Of course, like we create different kind of cohorts. And let's start with the first one. So we have new members for the last 30 days. As I said, so you always have a time frame. So you always look into a specific kind of time frame to see, okay, so also like to compare everything. So in the end, if you want to define it, I usually try to use the same time frame for the whole time. So of course, no one wants to stay a new user for all the time. So in the end, we are looking into new users who have been new for the last 30 days. The little bit tricky thing to understand is it's also the same when we go back in time. For example, now we are in February 2024. If we go back to August 2023, but also going back into July, because it could be when we have people signing up on the 15th of August, then it's clear, but we could also in this August bucket or cohort of new members, we can also have people who signed up on the 22nd of July. So this you have to keep in mind. So we have a time window that is moving back when you analyze. We say, okay, we get a new cohort. So here we do it with the first seen in the last 30 days. Pretty straightforward cohort, so it's not so hard to build. Then we build the returning users. And the returning users is basically just an inverse. And so I build it that way so that I say, in the end, I'm interested in everyone who's doing any event, which in the end, this is, let's say, the underlying definition for all users for the last 30 days again. And then I added a specific kind of filter and I say, okay, they shouldn't be in the new users in the last 30 days. So I'm basically excluded. So these are the returning ones. So now we come to the power ones, which becomes interesting because like here, so new members, returning users, are usually always like the same kind of definition. So this is our baseline. Power users is interesting, because now we basically put in our criteria for how we define value and then how we repeat the values over time. And this, you can, as I said, you can have different kind of definitions for power users here. I took one for Deep Sky Data. Deep Sky Data is my platform where we host free video courses. They are longer than this video, where we showcase similar things like here. We showcase how to work with data. And you have to sign up for the platform to watch the videos. And then you become a member. What's important for me is to see, it could be important for me to see if people finish courses. But we all know finishing courses is often a little bit hard topic. So sometimes you don't really know. Sometimes you're just interested in one part of a course, so you watch it until then. So you don't always go through the full course. At least I don't do it, rarely. I usually start a lot of courses, pick the stuff that I'm interested in. And so if people would measure if I complete my course, so they would judge me as a very poor member. But in reality, I'm pretty happy member of these platforms. And we saw similar behavior in our platform as well. For me, it's much more interesting if people start more and more courses over time, because this gives me an indicator if I attract enough interest over time, always over time, to start new things, to attract new insights. So this is a good indicator for us to get started. I take a much longer time period because these courses take long. And so it's not something that you do it every week. So for me, it's totally fine to look on a longer time period. It could be even like that. I might even increase it. I'm really interested, at least in these 90 days, they should have at least started 2 new courses or more. This is important for me. I could go down to say, okay, I'm super happy when they at least start 1 course, but this might be something that I create 2 power users scenarios and just compare them to see how it develops. So this is something that you have to test out with the data. We have the power users. Then let's have a look into power users at risk. So what we do here. We start with the same thing. So we say, okay, members who started a course greater than 2. So same baseline. What we now do is we take the same 90 days, but we go 30 days back. So in the end, we look at a time period of 120 days, but we want to make sure that this user has started 2 courses in a period between, let's say, before 30 days back and until 90 days. With that, we can say they have been a power user before, but in the last 30 days, we did not see this behavior. We see a first indication that their usage pattern has changed. And again, the 30 days is something to test out. I tested a little bit and I found the 30 days works best for me. But it's also, it might be like that we give them a longer time period and say, okay, we give them time for 60 days. So then, of course, we have to adapt this here, not 30 days ago, but 60 days ago, and then 60 days here. But it gives us a clear indication. There was a positive behavior for us in the past, but it was not visible in this case for the last 30 days. And this is why I say it's at risk. So I don't say they're churned yet because like they might still come back, but we can already see an indicator that something has changed. It could also be that, for example, we do this statement here for much longer periods, that we can say, or we use a different kind of criteria. So we could say we identify them as long-term power users when at least they have watched, I don't know, 4 courses over a time period of 9 months. And then when we look into the churn, we just expand that. So now we go longer back. Here we go 90 days back, and then of course take another 90 days beforehand. Again, you have to test all the data if it really fits this way. But this means we go beyond this power user at risk. So we go even beyond. We say, okay, these users at this point of time have been power users. So in this case, 3 months ago, they have been power users. We now watch them for the last 90 days, and they didn't came back to show the same kind of pattern. And by that we say we lost them. So we basically lost them as a power user because they don't show power user behavior again. So if we look at the chart, they are now here. Of course they can become power users again when, I don't know, anything can happen. They have changed jobs, they were on holidays for a long time, they were just too busy with other things. So they might come back. So we might re-win them as power users. But for us, it's really important to know, to get a feeling about, okay, how many people we can get into a power user status and how many people we lose over time, so that we can get a feeling about, are we losing too many power users? This is an optimization thing. So in the end, we can then have the data to really see, okay, how big is this step here? Is it too significant? Can we improve that? And we can implement new methods to basically prevent that. And then we can look at the numbers to really see, okay, how many power users do we actually lose over time? And can we increase or can we improve that? This is how we define the power users. And then what we can do is, of course, like we can work with the power users as well. And as you can see here, so we can go again into insights. In Mixpanel, you can use the cohorts that we just created, and you can just use them as normal metric. We can put them here. Now we can see, for example, in this scenario, we can look into returning users and we can look into power users. And it can give us an indication how well we are to get new users into power users. Here you can see that the power users are still stronger than the returning user. This can give us 2 insights. Either we are not really good into getting people to return, but we're at least good enough to have new people to try out at least 1 or 2 new courses. So this is a good indicator. If we now go into, and for example, let's take this out and look a little bit more into the power user life cycle. So here we can now see, look, we have a baseline on the platform right now from roughly 15 users that are power users. So you won't build a business on top of that yet. So it's definitely not ready. At the moment, we have around 20 users who are at risk. So who have been power users before, but we don't see this pattern again. So this, for example, could be now something that we can say, okay, maybe we run an activation campaign, which can help us to, in the end, increase the power users again and decrease, of course, the power users at risk. And then here we can already see these are the power users that we basically have lost. And so again, this has a longer look back period. So this, of course, can be a little bit higher as said. So you have to really adjust it that it really makes sense. But this is a good baseline for us, for example, if we run reactivation campaigns. So now we have a baseline of 45 people that potentially we can get back into power users because they have been power users before. Again, coming back to, if we would have monthly active users, we see that the monthly active users always staying the same because we are getting more and more new users, but it doesn't really tell us about something that, how many people we keep in a good pattern. And so this gives us a much better view into this to really see how people get into power users and also like how we might lose people as a power user over time. And so these charts can really help. When you just look into power users, how they're developing over time, there you can see it. And what you can also do is then that you then, for example, add the new users as a baseline, and then you can create a relation potentially. You have to check if the time periods then still make sense. But for example, if you rename power users into first-time power users. So then you can put it into comparison with, let's say, so they have been new for 30 days, they have become power users, and then you divide it by new members who have signed up, and then you have a relationship. So then you have maybe 15% of new users become power users in the first 30 days. And this gives you a metric that you can then work with. And so this is really powerful, and this is what you can do with this. We did a lot of stuff in Mixpanel. Let me give you a quick glance how you do the same thing in Amplitude. In Amplitude, the filter criteria are just different. Here, for example, we have this filter criteria have been new during the last 30 days. This is our first one. Then we have the returning one. And then again, we say, okay, did perform any kind of event, but have not been new during the last 30 days. So here we can even negate the new, and so can say like this. And then again, when we look into the power users, so here we again have member course started in the last at least 2 times in the last 30 days. So the same kind of definition that we used in Mixpanel. And then again, power users at risk. We do the same thing here. So here we work in Amplitude, it's called offset by 30, but it's the same principle that we did before. So we go back 30 days, then we take the 30 days after that, and we take this into account. I think in Mixpanel we had longer time periods because this is like the active data set I'm working with. So if I would align it, then I would go here. I think we had 90 days. So we'd go there, 90 days, and then, but again, we want to make sure that these people in the last 30 days didn't start the course. Same principle, and so you work in the same way. So you can also then create a segmentation based on that with this kind of cohort and then analyze this in the same way that we did before. Wrapping up, power users give you a new insights into how you are able to turn new users or returning users into users that you would love to have, that you would love to tell your investors about. These users who come back constantly, do the things that provide them value, and do this over time, constantly, all the time. And even maybe, as I said, so you can have power user 1, and then you can maybe even have a power user 3 level, whatever. So I saw setups where people really had a very distinctive model of, let's say, 4, 5, 6 different levels of power users, and they were analyzing how people are basically moving between these different kind of segments of power users to get a really good indication. So in the end, it's analyzing a game. So you have, I don't know, 100 people on level 1, and then you already have 45 people on level 2. And so you can really see, okay, how many people you can basically level up. The thing that makes it a little bit complex is always like you have the time period. So not just because someone was on level 2 for the whole time, it doesn't mean that they are still on level 2, because like they can just lose it. And this is like what you do with cohort. You can do this with a different approach, which we will do in the future in a different video, is like when you work with scoring. So when you work with scoring, you can look at scoring over time, and then you can derive these power users basically on scoring. And this makes the model a little bit more flexible, also like to represent, okay, how many people are really now we have on level 3 constantly, and then how many have we lost. So you can do really interesting things there, but this requires a little bit different kind of setup and definitely more complex setup. This setup here to identify power users, you can already do today. Once you have watched the video, you can shut down your this tab, not the browser, and hop over to Mixpanel or to Amplitude, and you can identify your first power user cohorts yourself. And you can immediately start to analyze it. And I can tell you, especially like when you talk to marketing teams, especially to the ones who do retention and CRM marketing, for them, this is a natural language. They immediately understand what you are doing. And the nice thing is, because you might know this already, is in both tools, you can always use this cohort and then sync it out to other tools, to other marketing tools. So I could now go in here and I could export this kind of cohort and to use it in any kind of marketing platform. Or in Amplitude, I can just go in here and I can set up a sync. It's automatically synced to the different kind of platforms. So I can run email campaigns to that. This is, if you show something like this to the marketing people, they will love you because they want to have something like power users at risk, because this is a highly likable cohort. It's a cohort that was already convinced that your product is really good, but they lost track for some reasons. And so there's a high chance that you can win them back. And so they love it, sync it up. They can run some email campaigns on that or do other things. So it's really interesting. So it's really powerful to investigate power users. If you have any kind of questions, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to get more pro videos about product analytics, and like the video and have a great day.